Cecil,
Yeah.
did you just see the text from Corrine?
Oh, she needs, yeah, is that from her? So she needs a link?
I guess.
What?
Uh,
Okay, let me, she has the same,
Wait,
oh,
is she here?
I don't
Are
see
you
her.
there? No, Cray is.
Yeah. Yeah, let
Can
me,
you? All
I'll
right.
send the link.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Evening, everybody. Evening, Mike.
Hey, Stuart.
Keeping well?
Hey,
Hi, everybody.
Maggie.
Hello.
Hey, Paul.
So we're trying to get Corrine into the meeting. So we're working on that right now. Just give us a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm glad you're here.
You worked really hard to make sure we had all the links and information.
All right, 1 second.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I heard you, Andrew.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello, good evening.
Hey, Adam. We're waiting for Karina to try to log in.
Mr. Chair, so we'll give her a couple more minutes, and if you want to start the meeting, I'm perfectly capable of calling roll and documenting any changes to the minutes.
Okay, well, let's wait one more minute and we'll see.
Okay.
We'll call you into duty.
I think you might have got me in, kid. Okay, thank you.
Karine,
Everybody got me.
well, we're ready. We're ready if you're ready.
Oh, sure.
Okay, well, everybody's here, so let's call to order the meeting of the Campbell Planning Commission for November 24th. And I got to say that this Planning Commission meeting will be conducted via telecommunication and is compliant with provisions of the Brown Act and Executive Order N-29-20 issued by the governor. Also an announcement that because of technical difficulties, we're not broadcasting on Comcast Channel 26 for the immediate future, not for this meeting for sure, but we are broadcast on the city's website and on YouTube. And with that, Karine, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Bookbinder,
Present.
Ding,
Here.
Colville,
Present.
Ripland,
Present.
Disser,
Here.
Vice Chair Ostrowski,
Here.
Mayor Craig.
And I'm here, so
Attendance.
got a full house. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes for our last meeting, November 10th? And any corrections or?
I do.
Sure, Commissioner
Just a
Zisser.
couple minor, no big deal. On page 19 of the PDF, there's a section about my comments about the tree. So, in the second bullet, I mentioned that the tree was inappropriate and there are no other huge trees. I was referring to, there were no other huge trees on the street side of the street. So I'd like that to be clarified, that that the street typically didn't have large trees
Street side.
along the curb of the street.
I will fix that for you.
And then there was one other where you call me the chair on page 21, and
Page
I
20.
don't want to take that away from Michael.
Oh, that's fine.
So on page 21,
I'll find it.
it says chairs. This, sir.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other changes, or anybody want to make a motion?
I'll move to accept the minutes as amended by Commissioner Zisser.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? So the minutes passed. Director Kermoyan, do we have any communications for the commission or agenda modifications?
There are none, Mr. Chair.
And this is the part of the meeting where we open it up to for anybody to speak on an item that's not on the agenda. I know we have a few people listening in, but I don't think there's anybody. But is there anybody who wants to speak on an item that's not on the agenda? We give you 5 minutes. Okay, hearing no requests, we'll close that part of the meeting and we'll move to our regular agenda. And our first item for the November 24th meeting is public hearing PLN 2020-133, a public hearing to consider the application of Stephen Gundon for a modification, PLN 2020-133, to a previously approved conditional use permit, PLN 2013-224, to allow expansion of an existing medical services clinic within a CVS pharmacy drugstore on property located at 1720 South Bascom Avenue. Staff is recommending that this item be deemed categorically exempt under CEQA. And our project planner is Daniel Fama. Daniel?
Thank you. Good evening. Let me share my screen here. All right, everyone see that okay?
Yes.
So this is a application for a conditional use permit modification for 1720 South Bascom Avenue. This is the Hamilton Plaza Shopping Center located at Bascom and Hamilton Avenues within the city's C2 General Commercial Zoning District. The subject business, CVS Pharmacy, is located within the center of that shopping center. In 2013, the Planning Commission approved a conditional use permit to allow small medical clinic use within the existing CVS, what they call a minor minute clinic. As approved and proposed at the time, that a clinic would provide minor routine medical care provided by nurse practitioners, not doctors. That conditional use permit limited the minute clinic to 2 examination rooms. CVS now is proposing to expand that and relocate it within the store. Shown here, they would move it to the other side of the store and have 3 rooms and a small waiting area. Because the existing conditions of approval specifically indicated that it could have only a maximum of 2 medical exam rooms, this proposal does require a modification to that conditional use permit. Otherwise, the same services would continue to be provided, and the minute clinic would operate from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. daily. With that, staff's recommendation is for the Planning Commission to adopt a resolution approving a modification to that previously approved conditional use permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any questions for Daniel? No questions, then I guess we'll open up the public hearing. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to speak on this item? Is the applicant's not here, I guess, Daniel, so.
I think the applicant is here, but I guess if the commission has any questions, you could address them.
Okay, well, any questions for the applicant?
I guess I have one question, and I may have been mistaken on the layout, but is there going to be other adjustments to the layout? It may not be under our purview anyway, but it looked like the layout of the rest of the store was changing a bit. I was just curious as to whether that was going to take place at the same time.
This is Stefan from Nora, the architect submitting the plans. There are some small changes happening all through the store. One of those is considered a consultation room for the pharmacy. It's a more private, area for them to consult for new medications and stuff like that. And then they're revamping the old location for where the minute clinics are into, they call it a sales room. It's just kind of a small room where they can provide more one-on-one attention to either like nutrition classes and like give more information to people about health and just kind of bring more awareness to whatever they're doing for that particular month or week or what have you. And they're also upgrading some things just for like finishes and their current brand and retail standards.
One other question. What was the impetus for this change? Is it that the existing clinic is particularly busy and so there's a lot of demand for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently the amount of the wait time for their current minute clinic exceeds what they really want. And they also saw this opportunity to provide a faster means of providing, health to, their customers. And especially during this, current pandemic with COVID, they are offering COVID testings, and they feel that, providing this extra room, they can get more, attention to, getting more tests, for their customers and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Any other questions? Any other speakers on item number 1? Okay, so with that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Who would like to start?
I support the expansion of having the additional space for the medical office and reducing the wait times for the Campbell residents. I think it's a good idea and nice to have medical services in a CVS facility.
Yeah, likewise, making it more accessible and hopefully more affordable is a good thing. So yes, my support.
You want to try a motion maybe?
Just if I can first. I'd like to concur with that and note that there's clearly a demand for more medical services here, given that we recently approved a clinic in the same plaza, and I'm happy that people in that area will be able to walk to medical services. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but if somebody wants to make a motion before I can find it.
Okay.
Agreed.
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution, reference attachment 1, approving a modification PLN 2020-133 to a previously approved conditional use permit PLN 2013-224 to allow expansion of an existing medical services clinic.
Is there a second?
Motion.
I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Zisser seconded. Corinne, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Was that Commissioner Zisser who did the second?
Yes.
Commissioners Bookbinder,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Colville,
Aye.
Rivlin,
Aye.
Zisser,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ostrowski,
Aye.
Aye.
Girl.
So that motion passes unanimously. The Planning Commission action is final unless appealed in writing to the city clerk within 10 calendar days. And that item is completed. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item number 2, PLN 2020-148. It's a public hearing to receive a presentation on the preparation of objective standards and procedures, PLN 2020-148, related to the review and permitting of residential projects in accordance with recent changes to state law. And our project planner is Stephen Rose. Stephen?
Thank you and good evening, Chair Cray and members of the Planning Commission. To get us started, I have our consulting loading our presentation. There we go. So just as noted, the second item on the agenda is for a presentation on the city's objective standards update, which will be provided in 2 parts. We'll go to the next slide. The first part will be presented by myself, and the second part by Simran Malhotra, who is a principal with Ramey & Associates, which I'll introduce in just a moment. Next slide. So after providing a brief introduction and overview of the purpose of this item and the events leading up to tonight, I will hand off the bulk of the presentation to Simran, who is with the consulting firm assisting with the project, who will provide an overview of the project and timeline, present and solicit feedbacks on the results from a community workshop and project approach and survey. Next slide. Okay. So a little bit of background I thought was warranted, especially since this is more or less our informal kickoff meeting with the Planning Commission as well. So over the past 3 years, changes to state law, primarily the Housing Accountability Act, have required the city to change the way that it processes housing development applications. The changes to state law are intended to provide greater clarity and certainty for developers, and they do make it difficult for the city to deny or reduce the difficulty of projects which are found to meet objective standards. So recognizing a great deal of the policies and guidelines and city documents are subjective, staff met with the City Council last year to discuss the implementation of both short and long-term fixes to those plans and policies. As an outcome of those meetings, the council directed staff to proceed with several short-term fixes and also hire a consultant with grant funding to help with the longer-range planning effort. In June of this year, Ramey Associates was selected to assist with the update based on their unique experience preparing codes and standards and their track record of successful community engagement. More recently, in October, we had our first kickoff meeting with the City Council, which is actually going to be very similar to tonight's presentation. At that meeting, the council also confirmed previous direction to staff that what we want to be achieving here is a surgical update to our existing codes and standards, and we're not trying to introduce new policies or propose new standards. We're really aiming at clarity, and it's meant to be very surgical just because of the number of documents that we're going to be tackling. And next slide. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass off the presentation over to Simran.
Thank you, Stephen. And good evening, Chair Cray and commissioners. My name is Simran Malhotra. I'm a principal with Ramey & Associates. We are a planning and urban design firm with offices in Berkeley, Los Angeles, and Riverside. And we have extensive experience working with communities in California as well as in other states on the West Coast on similar projects. I'm here today to introduce this project, provide an overview of why this is needed and what is included. And I'll also provide an overview of the project approach and the timeline and some of the results from the first workshop and survey that were completed in the last month or so. So what is the Objective Standards Project? As Stephen mentioned, there have been significant legislation that has been passed by the state of California over the last several years. And the goal for all this legislation is to expedite the production of housing in California. These laws achieve that goal in two ways. The first is require that cities establish objective development and design standards for all residential projects. And the second way is requiring jurisdictions to streamline and prevent delays in project review and permitting. And I'll talk about both of these aspects of the project today. And then I'll also note that while these state laws are applied to projects with more than one residential unit, this project will apply to all residential projects, and that includes standalone single-family residential with and without ADUs. And the reason for this is that this is a comprehensive approach, and it will provide consistency and clarity in the review and permitting processes, and it will also allow for addressing the design of new development in a context-sensitive manner. The project will focus on revising existing city regulations. We will provide clarifying details and remove subjective language. The goal is to eliminate personal judgment by providing uniform and consistent language. It will not introduce new standards or regulations that will impact established standards such as setbacks, building height, or density, and nor will it modify or contradict existing land use or zoning designations. Objective standards will apply to both new construction as well as additions or alterations. And as I noted, all residential projects will include single-family, multifamily, and mixed-use developments. The criteria for a project to qualify as mixed use is when 2/3 or more of the square footage is designated for residential use. State law does provide some exceptions to this requirement for objective standards and streamlined review. And the major exceptions are if a project requests a variance, a general plan or community plan or zoning amendment. Another is if it would cause significant health and safety impacts. An example of such an impact is noise. It is not sufficient for a city to deny a project simply by saying that it would create loud noise. The city needs to have previously established clear and quantifiable standards that establish the threshold for a project to be measured against. In other words, you can't create thresholds for environmental significance after the fact when a community opposes a project. We need to have those established in advance. Another exception is for projects with a historic designation. In this case, there is subjective review related to the Secretary of Interior standards, which although called standards are actually guidelines. In terms of what documents will be updated as a part of this project, there are several sections of the zoning code that we'll be updating, and this includes the definitions, the ADU section, the PD ordinance, as well as the permits procedures section. We will also be updated selected sections for consistency. 3 citywide residential design guidelines documents will also be updated. In addition, the 7 area plans that are listed on this slide will be updated. These cover about half the city in area and include a range of residential types and densities. And these documents contain development standards as well as design guidance for residential projects to varying degrees. We will not only address the subjective guidelines, but also ensure that there's consistency between these documents, the zoning code, and the general plan. The state law also establishes a definition for what is an objective standard. And the definition of that is up on the slide in front of you. And it essentially says that objective standard is a standard that involves no personal or subjective judgment by a public official. These standards must be clear such that both an applicant and the public official understand these to mean the same. Most regulatory documents have development standards and design guidelines, and most development standards are generally objective. These are often numeric. These include maximum heights, minimum setbacks, minimum or maximum densities, and other similar standards. However, most cities also have qualitative design guidelines that are subjective in nature. And these subjective regulations are no longer permitted. It is often confusing to identify whether such regulations are objective or subjective. An example of this is the box on the left. The box in the red states, fences and walls should be constructed of high quality, durable materials. This statement leads to individual interpretation. The use of the word should implies that this is optional. Secondly, what does high quality or durable mean? The standard, which is in the green box, states, and it provides clear direction that these are requirements, you shall do this. And then it lists which materials are permitted and which are prohibited, and that's very clear as well. So this is the modification we'll be making for most of for the contents of the various documents I mentioned. I will also note that there will occasionally be some places where there is no objective standard that relates to a specific non-objective guideline. As we create objective standards, we must also address the issue of how specific we should be. And there is a trade-off between allowing flexibility and creativity with less certainty in design and an increased design control with improved certainty and level of specificity. And an example of this is noted here. The box on the left lists a menu of options for building features that an applicant must choose two from, while the box on the right is more prescriptive in what is required. The second set of requirements for the state laws are related to project approvals. And as I noted earlier, state laws require streamlining of permits and procedures to allow for faster production of housing. And these laws, primarily through the Housing Accountability Act, require more ministerial approval for projects that meet objective standards. Some discretionary review is permitted for certain kinds of projects that I mentioned earlier, variances, general plan and zoning code amendments, etc. These laws also limit the amount of time cities have for review of an application for completeness. And cities get only one shot at asking for additional documentation. Once a project has been deemed complete, there are time limits that need to be met for approval. Other new requirements are that development fees that are in place at the time of the application submittal may not be increased. And also the objective standards that are in place will apply for that project, even if these are updated during the course of the application review. The HAA, which was originally adopted to encourage the production of housing, has been amended. The amendment states that if a project complies with objective standards and criteria, the city can only reduce density or deny a project if there's a specific adverse impact. The significant, quantifiable, direct, and unavoidable impact is also being defined, and it must be based on objective and quantifiable criteria. In addition, these new state laws have imposed time limits within which cities are required to review projects. These are dependent on the number of units. If the timeline is not met, the project is legally deemed to be consistent. There are additional legal burdens regarding approval. In essence, it'll be very hard for communities to deny or delay projects as long as they meet the objective standards that have been established. And as noted earlier, there's a few exceptions. In terms of the timeline of the project, we have a 4-step process. The first phase included our initial review of these documents and the identifications of issues and where changes are needed. We are now in phase 2, establishing a direction on how to make the changes. The council gave us direction in October and the public on October 21st. We also received feedback through a community survey that I'll describe some results for shortly. And we are here today for your input. The next 2 phases include the actual drafting of the changes to the documents and then the review process with the public as well as the Planning Commission and City Council. And then finally, the creation of the final documents ready for adoption next spring. There are several opportunities for the public to provide their input. There are 2 workshops. The first one, which was completed last month, was a webinar, and the second will be to present the public draft. The first workshop also included a community survey, And then finally, we'll be able to get additional input at the various study sessions and hearings. Now I want to spend a few minutes summarizing the results of the survey that was completed. We launched a survey that was open for about 4 weeks, and we received about 82 responses. Although not everyone answered every question, we got a fair amount of input from the community. Most of the respondents were residents and homeowners. The purpose of the survey was to better understand community priorities and concerns regarding neighborhood and building characteristics to help inform our work. The survey also provided an opportunity for the community to weigh in on the level of control and specificity that should be considered. One of the common elements of the various documents that we are updating is the desire for compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood. We try to get to understanding what the community means by that by asking several questions. We showed 5 sets of residential structures. These are up on the screen in front of you, and asked respondents to rate whether these were compatible or not. The results were unfortunately not definitive. We got and as you could see in the report that was included with your agenda packet, we had responses that ranged all the way from yes, they are compatible to not, without any one response being more strongly reported. However, when we looked at the top characteristics that were important for establishing compatibility, we found that height and size, as well as architectural style and features, were the top characteristics. This was in the case of when there's 2 single-family homes next to each other. When we looked at the responses for multifamily next to single-family, the top 2 characteristics were transition in height and scale, and also architectural style and features. Several of the other characteristics were less important. We also asked questions about degree of control, and there was clear consensus. With regard to color, the direction was that the city should prohibit worst-case scenarios, that is extreme colors, but otherwise allow for flexibility. Not wanting to see conformity across all projects was also a comment that was noted in the comment sections of the survey. Similarly, with regard to materials, the results showed that while certain materials should be prohibited, more flexibility should be provided in terms of what other materials are allowed. The detailed survey results, as I noted, are in your agenda packet, and that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'll turn this back to Stephen, and we are available to answer any questions you might have. Stephen?
Yeah, so with that said, I mean, the purpose of tonight's item is to provide the Planning Commission opportunity to have received this report and the presentation, help educate you a little bit on it. But also, more importantly, we're also looking for your feedback on the results of the community workshop and the survey, and how we should use that information to factor into our preparation of these documents. So what we could expand on is a little bit is that as we tackle these documents, and we have one a little bit later in the agenda tonight, which we'll talk about then, there will be opportunity, say, if you have a standard which says that buildings should be comparable in height and scale to one another, right? So what we're hearing from the community is that that is a sensitive topic, and we should be considerate of that. But when we're getting into these other topics, say about color, material, and design, we don't want to say that you shall pick, Kelly Blue Book or Kelly Moore paint sample 2139 through 3000. That's your appropriate color range. anything else should be prohibited. The feedback that we're getting is that when we do encounter standards like that, as we move through these area plans and documents, we should be leaning on trying to prohibit. What we're gathering from the survey results is we should be trying to prohibit some of the worst case results, like flamingo pink or neon green, but that we shouldn't be going so far as to prescribe standards. The community does want to see a little bit more flexibility. So that, with that said, I want to turn it back over to the Planning Commission and hear your feedback. Some of the comments, there was also comments in the survey as well. I'm not sure if any of these points that were raised by members of the community resonated with any of you, or if any points you want to draw out, or just, again, this is your opportunity to ask questions of myself or the consultant on this update, what this process means, and how it's going to factor into our update as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Stephen. That was a great presentation. Thanks, Simran. I expect you'll have a lot of questions and comments, so I don't know who wants to start it off.
I just had a question, actually. So there was this survey that was done, and how was it, advertised, or how were the participants, how did they find out about it?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So we actually did a multifaceted campaign trying to get out the word. We posted on the website, we did Nextdoor, we did Twitter, Facebook, as well as pretty much a social media blitz. We also did probably what I'd like to call the single largest email blast the city's ever done, trying to get it out that way as well. So parties that had expressed interest in planning projects in the past, they including an interest list which we had compiled as part of the In and Out project, the ADU update, similar projects like that. We took all of those email lists and we sent it to those groups. Some of them didn't want to be included on that email blast, as you can only imagine. So we kind of figured we wanted to err on the side of over notification rather than less. We don't have the budget. We didn't have the budget to do like a postcard noticing to all community groups. We will be doing notification as we hit those particular neighborhoods. So as say we update the Santa Moss area neighborhood plan, or as we update the Campbell Village neighborhood plan, those particular neighborhood groups will be updated as those materials are brought forward. But just as far as this update, we just did the best we could.
That's great. It's good that you used all available digital channels.
Any other questions?
I think Zizzer's, Alan, I think you're muted. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah, you're muted, Alan.
There I go. Okay. So actually, the other commissioner answered one of my questions, got one of my questions out about how it was done. And, the thing that struck me, I actually went through the survey, and because I like surveys and I've done surveys. So 82 doesn't seem like a big number. There's a number of things struck me. It was this, what I would call a small sample, number one. Number two is, it looks like over 50% came from the Santa Moss area. And then there were a number of questions where over half the people didn't answer. So what you end up with is quite a small sampling of people answering the survey. And then, again, I don't know if how heterogeneous the responders were, whether or not these were people who were, a good, diverse group that represented, all aspects of our residents and those involved in Campbell. Certainly the fact that over 50% of them came from one particular area is a little bit problematic for me. So I just wanted to express that an 82 is a small number. I mean, general standards are, depending on how many people you're sampling, is considerably more than that. And so I wanted to hear from Simran on her take on this. And I mean, I don't really have a lot of disagreement with the results, but I was concerned about the sample size.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Commissioner Zisser. The survey response rate at 82 is low. It's not very high, and as you noted, half, or in many cases, only half the respondents answered any particular question. Having said that, what the results are showing is not, it's what you would expect to see. When you ask folks about whether you like something or not, or if things are compatible, it is a subjective response. And this kind of proved the point of what the issue is with design guidelines, that they are subjective. And when you apply those, you get a whole variety of results and you don't get to the same conclusion. The other reason why I think the survey response rate was low is that we are not really changing any of the standards or any of the intent of the guidelines. We are just making them from subjective to objective. And that might be too esoteric a topic for the average resident to want to be interested in and participate. And then I can speculate on other reasons back in October, presidential election and other such events that were ongoing that might have posed a distraction from taking the survey. As noted in the staff report, the community workshop, the webinar we conducted, we only had one participant attend. So I think the topic may be less important to residents at this point of time.
Yeah, I'll briefly just go on to add that we actually ended up rescheduling our workshop to avoid conflict with one of the presidential debates. We actually scheduled it. We had to reschedule it. So we were trying to be cognizant of that.
So I just want to hop on with a question to Simran since she's talking. Maybe Stephen can answer this as well too. A fantastic point, of course, from Commissioner Zisser, and I think the response that we got from you was great. My question, Simran or Stephen, we're looking at how to objectify something, make it less subjective, and I'm curious as to what the intent is behind asking for the feedback from these people in a subjective manner, because the answers we're seeing here are a plethora of different variations of subjective opinions from these community members who took the survey. None of this I find very relevant to objectifying what we're trying to do, since we know, as you mentioned, the intent is not to actually change any of the policy. There's no changes at all to the actual, like you said, the numbers, the height, setbacks, etc. How are we going to be benefited from the subjective answers that these questions have elicited?
Again, Commissioner Caldwell, that's a good question. In my presentation, I observed that most of the area plans and the design guideline documents talk about compatibility and preserving neighborhood compatibility as an important element. And that in and of itself is just that term is subjective. So what we were trying to get to with this survey, and by showing these various examples of two adjacent homes or a home next to a multifamily structure, was to try to get to understanding what the residents of Campbell thought made for two buildings being compatible to each other. So the first question, which was, in your opinion, are these two buildings compatible, was the subjective part of it. But then the objective part of the question was when we asked, okay, which are the elements or which are the characteristics of these buildings that you think make them compatible or not. And so the second part of the question is more useful to us as we begin to write objective standards for a subjective criteria such as neighborhood compatibility.
Got it. Thank you for that answer. And reading these comments, I'll just make one more comment or question. Reading the responses, I like the objective, the graph, the questions answered, and then how they rated the importance of these different things. Of course, that's incredibly important. So a question to you, one more, Simran, is that looking at the comments themselves, I'll quote a few. They are similar in size, two different styles and sizes, totally different. Size, style, footprints, very different. Concrete, too much greenery. Do you feel like you've been able to so far extract any reasonable objective standards for us to use moving forward?
Again, as I noted, I think, the work we do will be based on our professional judgment. The survey and the survey results is just one factor we'll use to influence how we write those objective standards. So obviously there's a whole variety of comments that were noted in the survey responses, and we'll take those into account as we write objective standards.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's my follow-up question. How does one write something? So how does that affect how you write this? If you saw most people are concerned with the height of buildings, does that almost become a voting pool for you to then craft an objective standard? Or I know you're not rewriting any ordinances, but how does the public's input sway or change the way you craft the new objective standard?
Sure. So since height and scale were the size and height were the two biggest, or the most important characteristics that were raised in the responses, when we are writing objective standards to address the subjective criteria that buildings shall be compatible with their neighbors, we will begin to define what that means. That the size can be the height within certain feet of the next building needs to be within. And I'm just using a number right now. We'll have to study that a little bit more. Be within 5 feet in height of the neighboring structure, for example. And that obviously will need to work in context of what the development standards for that property are. So we might have to, we'll write objective standards that set up transitions between existing buildings and new construction that occur next to them.
And Commissioner Rivlin, if I may, I'm hearing your question as well. And I want to kind of give a different example than height, perhaps, which I think helps illustrate how this feedback, which we received in the community survey, could actually factor into our implementation effort, as it were. So we have a standard in our downtown which talks about prohibiting garish color. And one could take that information and translate it to say, well,
sorry, Stephen, can you repeat that? Prohibiting what? I didn't catch that.
It says garish colors, which is garish colors, right? Which isn't very clear what that means. That what is garish to me could be different from a different individual. So what you could take, I mean, as Commissioner Zizzer properly or captured in his comments, is that we have a very limited sample size here. You could take these results and say, you know what, we did receive great feedback from the San Tomas area, but we didn't receive as strong a contingency from other areas of our community, although we did have a little bit of representation across the board. But kind of getting back to that garish standard comment, when taking that standard, if you apply the feedback which we just received in this survey to that standard, when we're trying to translate that from subjective to objective, right? We could take that and say, we shall be prohibiting flamingo pink and neon green. Those are examples of garish colors which we aren't going to allow, right? Or we could say, it has to be earth tones, which include the following ranges from the following book and color guide. That's how prescriptive we could be in translating that very same standard. So you could take it from, again, kind of going back to Simran's slides. She had that slide that was explaining you could be more flexible or more prescriptive. So the feedback is meant to help guide us in translating these standards. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Let me continue. I sort of get it with color, and it's defining a subjective idea that we might not even know the impetus for. So if somebody just didn't like bright pink and they wrote the word garish, but now we're cutting out reds and we're cutting out purples. This is hypothetical, not actual crafting here, but like we may be cutting off options because of an interpretation. So that raises a little concern. And let me go back to height. I think we already have an objective standard on height. We have a certain design guideline on 27 feet. I might get that number wrong. Or, a certain area we have, the max height is X feet. So I'm not sure that even would need to be rewritten. I guess our area, but what I would fear is that we have a single story home and we rewrite an objective standard to say the transition can only be in 5-foot increments. I know that's not what's going to happen, but now we're limiting 2-story homes because we tried to find an objective standard. That's where I'm a little nervous.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess the other question I wanted to ask along those lines is, what for Simran and Stephen is, when I look at these results, I mean, what is your conclusion on this survey? Because when I look at it, it kind of averages out to pretty much neutral. The first couple questions maybe is a little bit more towards, it's like slightly incompatible, but your averages are like 4.75 and things like that. So to me, there's kind of a broad range of feelings across the community, with the average being pretty neutral. How do you interpret these results?
Yeah, I think that illustrates the point that compatibility is a subjective criteria, and people have different opinions on whether two buildings are compatible or not. I think it essentially proves that point.
Right. So then, getting back to the last question that was asked by Commissioner Rivlin. So given that, what is going to be written? What is going to be objectified versus eliminating the subjectivity in the code?
So to go back to the issue of height, I think it'll be more critical when you have a property where single family is permitted, and right next to it you have a property where a multi-family structure is permitted with higher height. And you might expect to see, or if we just look at the maximum height standards that are allowed for the multi-family structure, you have, it's 4 stories, right? So it's about 50 feet. And the single family zone or the single family structure is 1 or 2 stories. Usually you have a subjective design guideline that says that there will be transitions between the single family home and the adjacent multi-family structure. And through the design review process and the hearing process, the project gets refined to be designed in such a way that there are some step downs in the multifamily structure to the single family structure. Since we are now required to have objective criteria, we will need to establish different ways, and there are different ways of doing this, how to create the step down so that it's objective. It can be based on height restrictions within X feet of the property line. You can show a plane going at 45 degrees from the property line, and that all buildings need to, the building needs to, for the multifamily structure, needs to fall below that within, the first 30 feet or whatever the number we establish. We'll have to take a look at that. There are ways of making, establishing those criteria objectively. And, I don't have an example that I could show you right now, but that's the typical objective standard that we create for establishing that transition that we want to see, so that there are no adverse impacts on the single family structure.
These are good questions, and I want to hop in. I don't want to take from our fellow commissioners, because I know they have great questions. This topic is very important. Commissioner Rivlin, I think one of the intents of your question was to figure out how the importance of these categories that we have in this survey, how are they going to help rank the priorities that you give this objectifying of the terminology? And the question is valid because in my mind here, if we were to look at wording, we would find all wording that would be subjective, and then we would fix it. If you start to look at areas where there is little to no wording and or subjective wording, and you decide, well, it looks like the most important thing was building height, and therefore we are going to in order to make it more objective, we're going to start to add verbiage that's going to give very specifics to these height setbacks, just random examples, of course, maybe fence heights. At that point, now you're adding verbiage, and you are starting to actually change the language and create new zoning restrictions or zoning ordinance words that are going to become objective in a place where they weren't objective. I'm not sure if this is coming off, if this is making sense to you guys, but it seems pretty cut and dry. If something's subjective in the wording, you find it and you make objective. I don't understand the relevance of how the neighborhoods, the community members, 80 of them, have decided that they like the importance of height the most. How does that play in at all? Am I the only one that's having this question?
If I could just jump in, the art of a survey is an interesting thing. The survey is really trying to engage the public and collect first impressions of what they feel is important. I think we really need to pull back here and understand that the goal here is to take what's subjective and make it objective. That's our goal. So what we would want to avoid is if, let's say, the San Tomas plan or the Campbell Village plan talks about achieving through design principles that are very subjective, a form of compatibility with development with the neighborhood. We don't want to eliminate that, because obviously that was important to the residents that created those requirements. But we will use the impressions that we're gleaning from neighbor sentiment, and yeah, it's not fully conclusive, but it doesn't surprise me that height and size is a #1 response as being critical. I mean, that's usually the elephant in the room, right? It's just this big structure, and how does it fit in? So we're going to be looking at the subjectivity and try to refine it to something that's very objective. Now, there's plenty of neighborhoods that this won't apply to. So for example, areas out, R1 zone areas outside of San Tomas, right? There's no design principles, so it's strict standards, height, setback, coverage, etc. The Pruneyard Creek side neighborhood, that's all R16, outside an area plan, once again, strict standard. It's those areas that have these squishy design expectations that we really need to funnel down to something that's objective. And that's going to be the art that Stephen and Simran will be working on. And of course, you as the planning body, truly the planning body, the commission is, will be working with the consultants to get something that you feel will work. And always use kind of this, what you're seeing on this question 7, as just kind of the community sentiment of those who chose to respond. It's certainly not conclusive, as Commissioner Zisser had mentioned.
Yeah, and I have a question and then a comment. Being I'm new to this, and I'm not familiar with some of the history, but this is not going to be a one size fits all. Every one of the 7 aren't necessarily going to end up with all the same objective criteria. Is that correct? Each one of the 7 could have their own objective criteria that is different. Is that correct?
What slide are you referencing?
No, I'm just saying you got 7. We're doing, we're going to be talking about one neighborhood, but there's 7 different neighborhoods, and the question I have is when we come up with objective changes, they're not going to be objective changes citywide. It's conceivable that the North Campbell versus San Tomas objectives could be different. Is that true?
Of course. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because one of the things that going back to Commissioner Colville's comments about some of the comments is that there was somebody who said, well, why can't we be like San Francisco, some district where they use lots of colorful, houses, in San Francisco, there's some neighborhoods where colorful houses are good things, right? I mean, every house is a different color and some of them are pretty bright. Well, maybe there's not a single neighborhood in Campbell where that would make sense, but it's conceivable that a color or some other subjective criteria could apply to a particular Campbell neighborhood that makes sense more than another. Am I?
No, that's absolutely right. So like the downtown development plan that talks about how you relate different building heights and relationships to the street will be far different. The objective standards we create there will be far different than, say, Campbell Village, that's talking about size of homes in relation to other sizes of homes. The scale and proportion will obviously be different depending on its environment.
I
have a couple of questions, if I may. How much of the new proposed general plan, because there's been a lot of community outreach on that, has or will be taken into account? Because I guess this survey is type of layered on top of that, and maybe so. That's my question. How much?
Yeah, the new general plan does not go into that level of detail. In fact, it's going to respect the area plans that have already been created. They're not going to redraft the area plans, but we would like to, when we implement the general plan, see, that's a different thing. The implementation of the general plan would actually be the comprehensive update of your zoning ordinance, potentially updates of your area plans. These are all tools or offshoots that help implement the general plan. The general plan will remain very broadly discussed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, just one quick question. I can see, for best will in the world, we'll be making quantitative measures here and standards, and they'll have unintended consequences. Some of them will be good and some of them be room for improvement. How do we actually change them after we set them? So if we found out it was actually causing an issue, what's the process to change them after that?
You reserve that right all the time. Like right now, if you feel there's something wrong with the zoning code right now, forget about the objective standards. You can request to change it. So it just goes through the standard planning process of planning commission review, recommendation to council, council adoption.
Okay, I just wondered if the state law said you can only change this once a year or something. So there's no restriction.
Yeah, with your general plan, you're allowed to change up to 4 times per year. Within the last couple of years, I don't think we've changed the general plan once. And then there are ways to bundle different changes that the council has approved, and you submit those formally to the Office of Planning and Research, OPR, and you can do that 4 times a year. So there's different ways of doing it. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. What you do have is that if you feel the new code or policy is not working, change it.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions and comments, but just first, Chair Cray, is this a time just for specific questions, or if we have?
Well, you know, there are a couple of people, and I'm not sure they want to speak for this, but let's keep this to questions, and then we'll have a bigger discussion real quick.
All right. So first, does this get rid of SARC?
No, it does not. I mean, our permit processes are going to stay intact. So we're still going to have a SARC, we're still going to have a planning commission. And I don't want us to get so hung up on the fact, I've heard the conversation that we've had tonight. I don't want us to get so hung up on points like color, and there's going to be some elements to this that we can retain a degree of discretionary control, so long as we don't preclude the development of a project. You can't deny a project, a residential project that has more than 1 unit on the basis of color. You can't say this 5-unit subdivision, I don't like it because it's blue, therefore I'm going to deny it. That would be an example of something that we should not and could not be denying a project on the basis of, right? But if we were to condition that change, and we had some guidance in our code that provided us better guidance on what standards we're trying to achieve, that is something that we can do. So there is objectivity, and there is still a discretionary element to this, but it's limited. I know that's getting esoteric. I know it's getting nuanced, but that is actually what it is.
If I could simplify that, thank you, Stephen. So the Site and Architecture Review Committee is charged with helping plot, if you will, development that's cohesive to its built environment. So even though a project that would be reviewed by SARC meets all the standards, you may feel the orientations and relationships and potentially tree removal may not work. So you have the ability to kind of massage that within the keeping of the standards. So the SARC will still be there. I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, thank you. My next question was, just in terms of timing, do we expect to finish the entire objective standards update before the new general plan would go into effect?
If I had a crystal ball, I would think, and I would hope the general plan would be adopted prior to the objective standards. And this is the formal objective standards that Simran and her team are working on. Parallel to that, Stephen and his team are working on the temporary standards that we were trying to do, kind of a short-term fix, because right now we're a little exposed. These laws are in the books right now, and we have to be really careful of utilizing subjectivity to, rationalize if you're going to approve or deny a project. We have to rely on objective standards. So we're trying to do some quick fixes on the staff side. Simran and her team are working on the longer term fixes. And, if the general plan is adopted prior to that, and there's the need to kind of move the objective standards in a different direction, we would always have that ability with Simran.
Okay. And lastly, I just have one more question for this segment of this. All right. So just set the stage. I'm excited about this. A predictable, legible process is really necessary for people to be able to come here and build. I think we want that, and we should, in general, absolutely not preemptively make things more restrictive than they need to be. I had the chance to look over the survey results. I read each and every one of the comments that the free-form comments that people left. I noticed that the bulk of the comments were from homeowners, were from people in the San Tomas area who tend to care a lot about the design of their neighborhood, and who have shown up here to represent their area plan, I think, in the time that I've been here, more than other groups. So we already have a sample of people who are already more engaged. I guess I want to ask Simran, is this level of engagement and this sort of attitude, is this typical of other cities that you've seen? Do you find that here fewer people seem to care, or that the people who do care seem to be more invested in one way or another?
Yeah, I think it's not that people don't care, and I don't think that's unique to Campbell. I think what we find is as topics get into more esoteric issues, such as development standards or zoning, or even design guidelines, and they are generally citywide topics, that there is less interest until I think we'll begin to see more interest from the community when the specific plans, the area plans, are up for review. So when, for example, we bring back the San Tomas area plan, neighborhood plan for review with the changes that are within it, we'll probably get a good turnout from that community as they review the responses. This first round, which was more of an educational workshop and survey to explain to people this is something that's required by the state, this is why the city is undertaking this project, and the scope is very narrow. It's making subjective criteria objective. That in and of itself doesn't warrant a lot of interest. And that's not unique to Campbell. We see that in other communities as well.
I would ask you, just as part of that, thank you for explaining that. I suppose you would be expected to see people care, like have more and more investment and involvement as something gets more and more local to them and on a citywide level, that there's not as much interest. But the style of that interest, I was surprised to see that the people who were the most engaged seem to be pretty split on the idea of whether or not we should have strict standards. Because when people care a lot, and when people are particularly invested and come here, it tends to be that they want things to be stricter. Is the result that the most engaged people have a sort of not terribly invested in making things very strict attitude? Is that what you've seen elsewhere? Is that odd, or is that just the way it tends to be?
I think it's the way it tends to be. You know, when folks start thinking about how that applies to their own house, you know, how whether they can, if they can pick the color of their house versus if the city is telling them what color to paint their house, I think people's responses can begin to change. When you are thinking about a hypothetical project in downtown or elsewhere, you are more willing to see more control, but when it comes down to your neighborhood, you often don't want to see as much control. I think that's again a pretty typical human reaction that we note in other communities. And then, having said that, this is a very small sample, so you know, I don't want to read too much into the results and try to establish what people's motivations were in the way they answered.
Of course, thank you. That answers my question. I have a variety of comments on the subject, but I'll hold those for later.
I have a question, but I wasn't sure if the chair wanted to ask if the community had any input first.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions first. I was going to ask staff, and then I'll open up the meeting. But you have a question for staff?
Yeah, I do. So I wondered, you know, because the San Tomas area folks were overrepresented at 50%, but they're only 30% of the residents in Campbell. Did you take a look at whether, if you just looked at their results versus the rest of the respondents, was there, a bias in one way or the other, or was it pretty much similar responses to the rest of Campbell in general?
That's a good question. We have not done that yet. We'll be happy to do that and report back.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just ask just 2 quick questions and then we'll open it up, or maybe not quick, but on that one subject that Commissioner Colville brought up and everybody else brought it up too. And I guess I just want to ask Stephen and Simran if they agree with my interpretation, because what did it's kind of stopped me. We talk about that there's no new standards are going to apply, but we're trying to objectify the subjective. So to me, it's almost semantics, because really what we would wind up with are sort of new standards. If you say, hey, you can't use lime green, you can't go 48 feet here, you can only go 45. So we're kind of, in a way, I know they're not new standards, but they're sort of new standards. It's kind of the way I looked at it. Is that fair reading?
Yeah, yes and no. I think it'll depend on individual subjective criteria and how those are how they are objectified, or made objective, I should say. In some cases where we are introducing new numerical standards, and they may vary from what the existing are, but they won't conflict with them. So for example, if there's a maximum height established already, or a maximum setback established, we may make or allow for certain deviations within certain percentages of that standard, whatever it is, height or setback. So we may provide that flexibility so that it remains objective and it doesn't become a discretionary action. So there will be some new quantities or dimensions that are established, and those are a part of the work we do. But when we say there will be no new design standards or new objective standards, what we mean is we won't change the allowed height from 50 feet to 75 feet in some location, or increase setbacks from 30 feet to, or decrease setback from 30 feet to 15 feet. We will not be making those modifications, but there may be some changes within a small percentage range of
those.
those.
If anybody appreciates how tough your job is, I think it's our group here. But I don't know if you could go back on your presentation. If you could go back to your one slide that was the trade-offs slide. Can you go back to that, Simran?
Yes.
Because it was a side-by-side trade-off.
Give me a second.
I guess this was it. That's the one. I'm trying to put it into context, and I wasn't sure. I just was really showing you how stupid I am, maybe. But which one's better? Which one are we shooting for? Or do we want a mixture of both?
I guess I'll pose the question to you. Which one would you prefer to see? I think there are different approaches we can take to writing these objective standards. In some cases, I think the standard on the left makes more sense. It gives you more flexibility. We say, here are all the various features you allow for establishing articulation, and these include balconies, cantilevers, dormers, bay windows. The list is there, and you need to use 2 of those at least, or more. And in other cases, it may be more. It may lead us to being very specific and prescriptive about what we allow. Again, I think the approach will vary depending on what the actual standard is.
So this process wrestles with these trade-offs. That's kind of what we're doing.
It does. And And, you know, if the Planning Commission today feels that we want to maintain flexibility to the extent possible, then as we do our work, we would tend to lean towards the to writing standards such as those on the left. So that's the kind of input we'd like from you all today.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. That helps me give a little more context. At this point, let's just, can we just open, we can always ask questions of the staff again, but let's open up the public hearing in case there are, I know there are some people on the meeting here. I'm not sure if they wanted to speak on this item, but if there's anybody in the public that wants to talk, we can give you 3 minutes on this item. So the public hearing is open.
Hey, this is Raja. I'm the only person at that public meeting that Simran was referring to. So basically what happened was the objective standards are not like a legal requirement from the state. There was some other state requirements that came in for housing approval and stuff. And so this is the objective standards. This whatever we are trying to do is a response that the planning department or the city council is trying to take to avoid legal issues and stuff. So as far as advertising goes, I know I have reached out to Stephen about this, but I didn't see the public meeting advertised anywhere in Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I even went and checked like 20 minutes ago. It's still not there about the public meeting thing. So the city council and planning commission always says this is a small city charm. But if we are trying to, what we are trying to push for is cookie cutter kind of a thing. So the roof has to be like this, the elevation has to be like this, the color has to be this. I guess the whole small city charm is gone. So why not if we have to go with those standards, I don't think Ansley roof in that day is a standard or like a typical thing, right? But still it's like a noted place right now in Campbell. So we are going to miss such kind of new architectures. And pushing for specifics like color, blah, blah, blah. Instead, you know, if the planning department does not like the proposal for the color, they can always bring it to planning commission for a public hearing. And if a bunch of neighbors come and say, hey, no, this is not acceptable in my street, then okay, it's denied. But if the street, like one of the commissioners was saying, reference to San Francisco, but if the entire people in the street are okay with it, why not? Maybe they're all going to have one yellow color, one blue color, one pink color. It's going to be a unique aspect of Campbell, right? You'll be in one of the magazines or something. In effect, the survey clearly shows a neutral stand where people have rejected both sides of that arrows we were showing, either too flexible or too stringent kind of a thing. So the other thing about Commissioner Revlin talking about, are we really going to restrict 2 floors thing? See, if someone is trying to build a new house in Campbell, it's not cheap. So the economics of building a house will come in. Only at a certain square feet, it will become viable. Only then people will come and build things. And that was the intention of the state laws that we are trying to introduce to encourage more housing and stuff. So to me, this looks like this sole exercise is being done to stifle, development of new buildings and stuff. So yeah, those were my takes. So I don't know what we are really achieving with trying to push this objective standard when this is not a requirement from the state.
Thank you, Raja. Is there anybody else who wants to speak out there on this item?
I'll just quickly add, just in response to Raja's comment,
sure,
if I may.
Sure.
And just maybe to clarify my prior comment regarding public noticing and outreach that we've done. For this particular meeting, we didn't do the Facebook, Twitter campaign that we did, but for the community workshop we had.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Stephen. Any other speakers for this item? And if not, then we'll close the public hearing and back to commission. So we'll continue our discussion.
If I could just jump in, Chair Cray.
Sure. Sure, Mr.
Raja mentioned very specifically that the creation of objective standards is not coming from the state. I would disagree with that statement, and the city attorney, Mr. Seligman, maybe you want to add to that.
Yes, the Housing Accountability Act and a couple other statutes enacted by the state legislature specifically say that you cannot deny a housing development unless it is based on objective standards. So I suppose you could say the state isn't saying we have to adopt objective standards, but if we don't, we are never going to be able to deny any kind of housing development. That is the only basis by which we can generally deny a housing development under the Housing Accountability Act.
Are most cities going through this process right now in California? I imagine they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look, some cities are marginally ahead of us. Some of them haven't even started.
Anyway, we'll close the public hearing. We're back to the commission. So who wants to start us off?
Yeah, happy to start with some of my comments. So looking at the comments that people have left was absolutely fascinating here. And it reads almost like people would prefer a form-based code. I know we're not talking about changing our city's code in general, but after having seen for each individual project, people have very restrictive opinions. It's just very interesting to see this. I picked out a few comments that I wanted to share that were from the survey that I wanted to quote here. There's 5 of them in total. The first one being, setbacks and green space are more important than the number of units in a project. Public art and access to amenities are important. Compatible sounds like you want stuff to match too much. Variety is nice. Good Lord, we need more housing. People live in them, thus compatible. And then on the other hand, there's stop putting people in every square inch of this bedroom community, which I think the state has opinions on that one, which don't match up there. Just reading all this, I have a strong opinion here that we absolutely should not be more strict than is justified by a clear and specific desire from our residents, that we should not be preemptively strict. I recall Director Kamoyan saying that there are some cities that tend to have very strict development standards and some that tend to have very lax development standards. And I do expect that at some point somebody will show up and insist that something may fit the objective standards that we in their neighborhood have set, but it still doesn't fit into their neighborhood. And I think that's inherent to the process and we should expect it, but we should not make things strict in advance of seeing a very clear signal. And I think what we see here is that that the objective standards should have a light touch, that there are some things that people very, very much care about, but in general, we should not make things more tightly regulated than there's a really, really clear reason to.
You know, I'll follow up on that, Commissioner Brookbinder. The sentiment is shared by myself as well too, and I think as well, Raja. I love his participation. He comes often, and he really makes his voice heard, which is what we really ask from our community. And I think what I gather from a lot of the comments and his concern is echoed here is that we don't want to start restricting too much, just like has been said, the homeowners and what they can and can't do with the property. I think I'd like to point out the verbiage of something that is prohibited, in my opinion, would be preferable to the verbiage of something that is a must or the only option that you will be given. So for example, I'm just quoting from the Campbell Municipal Code on fences and lattices. This is from the code 21.18.060. Don't worry about looking it up, but this is in the code. And this is just talking about fences. And they tell you in section D, the prohibited materials. It says chain link fences are prohibited. It goes on a little bit further, but then number 2 is also barbed wire and razor fence, razor wire fencing are prohibited. And it gives a few other caveats as well too. The verbiage I like much more when you say that you cannot have very specifics for good reason. And I'm saying this hoping that also Simran and them will hear this and and apply this to the future of what they're doing here, because that is more impactful and I think more important to the community, as opposed to just telling people that they have these options and what they should be able to do and what they can and can't do. I have a huge concern as a homeowner about being told what I can and can't do with my property, just because somebody thinks that I shouldn't be able to do it, or they think it is ugly. So there's a genuine concern. I think one of the comments I'd like to point out as well, it's a very good point that somebody made, whoever wrote this comment, question number 8, their comment was, the criteria in this survey are not relevant to the future of design requirements. And that's a very true point. When you look at some of the things here and we're asking in the categories, height and size, architectural size, architectural style, orientation, placement of garage, or roof style, roof lines. And these are some of the objective things that we're asking about when we say what are the key characteristics that are most important to ensure compatibility. But these are all aesthetics. These are all things that are seen externally, which again lead you to a subjective analysis of the property, when I would rather focus on things that might promote or at least entertain, the idea of searching for things that are going to be compatible with maybe more green technology, more use of solar or some type of alternative that's going to really help. I don't see any verbiage or anything that analyzes that, or at least asks about the importance of that type of compatibility with the community as a whole, as opposed to just aesthetically, I don't like how big it is and the setback and the front yard is ugly. To me, that might be not the most relevant thing for us to look at when you look at compatibility. And of course, as mentioned by Raja and a few other people, looking at a home that was built in 1960 and then a brand new one that was built right next to it and saying, oh, these compatible. Well, I sure hope that they wouldn't be identical and completely compatible in every aspect, because that means we haven't really gone very far in 60 to 80 years worth of development and different standards. I enjoy walking down the street and seeing a lot of variance in the housing styles. Maybe the materials might be more conducive to a heat insulation in the winter. Maybe this new technology came out that somebody's trying. Maybe they're putting the Tesla panels on their walls. Whatever it might be, I think the key takeaway from me and my take on this is that if we're going to objectify language, I would prefer to have more of the prohibitive type of verbiage. You cannot do this specifically, and then allow the community members themselves to put forth their plans. It would still need to be reviewed by us anyways. And that's just my take, guys. Thank you.
On the face of it, I think the intent's correct, and I've heard this many times from staff, and in just being on the commission for 4 years, that we need to be objective and we can't be subjective in our decision making body. So on the face of it, I completely agree with the term objectivity, and I think we should, as a team or a commission, look at things objectively. However, I would also ask Simran and her team with staff to take a light-handed approach, such that that objectivity is very, I'm contradicting the word objectivity here, but it's very open for options, not open to interpretation, but open for options. So if there are 10 choices, 9 are available, and it's clear that there's one that is not. But like mentioned, I think Chair Cray mentioned it, if we do write a objective approach and say lime green is out, I don't know that anyone ever said in the city of Campbell they didn't want lime green, even in your surveys. I know that's a hypothetical color, but I don't think there was anything ever in Campbell's code or from the public that isolated specific colors and said these aren't, conducive to our neighborhood. So I think we do have to be very careful in the way this is crafted, that we aren't changing the character of Campbell. It would be subtle, but the subtlety could take place over 30 years. And then we would look back and say 30 years later, that objectivity blocked us from certain paths. Now, we couldn't predict what would have happened, but there would be opportunities that we'd forego. So I think it's kind of coming out of a few commissioners here. I would like to see the objectivity met for legal reasons and to meet the state's guidance and to encourage more housing. However, I don't want it to limit creativity or people's, desire to come to Campbell or be part of Campbell or bring kind of, a new flavor or new character to our city within reason. I know that's subjective too, but I think what I'm reading here is we want to be careful not to limit our city's design. I suppose design guidelines would be able to set those rules as long as they're objective, and that's per neighborhood, as I understand the way it's structured. That's all.
Yeah.
For
and just to add to that, and I think in the time that I've been on the Planning Commission, even though we have, we have some subjective guidelines, I haven't seen anything come before the Planning Commission that, we all said, oh, that, that's really unusual and strange. That, we haven't seen anything we would be able to write in a code to exclude, I guess is what I'm saying. So it seems like a lot of this kind of takes care of itself. And I agree that we don't want to limit people's creativities. We've seen some really nice modern architecture on some newer buildings. A lot of that has functional aspects to it, energy efficiency, bringing the south sun in the winter and those kinds of things. I think where we have seen some discussions is around the subjective guideline related to mass and scale, and we've made some minor suggestions in those areas. But even that, there are objective standards that quantify what you can do in terms of lot coverage and floor area and things like that. And I remember, the Campbell Village specifically got to a point where the lot coverage percentage was actually increased. And the reason for that was because it encouraged people to build a bigger one-story rather than a two-story, and therefore was a way to encourage people to respect their neighbor's privacy, but still have the building space that they may have needed. So, the goal by the state is that the state wants to encourage housing so people can live in this area. And so one of my concerns is that if we put restrictions on mass and scale more than we already have with some of the objective criteria, then we're kind of going against what the state is trying to do. And if the state's trying to create housing, and we know that people are building bigger homes to accommodate extended families and multi-generational living, or kids that are coming back from college and things like that, we're being a bit working against what the state is trying to do. So, I think that's a lot of why the survey and the feedback from the residents has been pretty neutral in terms of whether these different properties next to each other, whether they agree or not. So I think that it's something we have to do very carefully.
Yeah, I think they're good comment by the Vice Chair and also Commissioner Rivlin. I think we've been talking about subjective and quantitative measures. I also think putting in qualitative measures in terms of quality of construction, because I think the majority of the developments we see are actually good quality developments. And I think part of that is because, we do have that type of subjective ability to say, well, you should be doing this if you want to go ahead with that development, which is going to be largely removed. So if that's going to be removed, I think putting in, I'm not sure how to do this, it's just a comment, trying to put some quantitative measures in that talks to producing quality developments, right? Rather than somebody seeing, okay, now I can put in a low quality development, which would adversely affect the area and actually lead to problems further down the line. And I think maybe the other thing for us to think about is, the intent is to increase housing. If we're putting in these quantitative measures, which areas do we think are going to be most suited for what type of developments? And then tailoring and thinking about those quantitative measures so that we might find an area is more suited for 3 or 4 story developments, because there may be some in that area, or they may be down a main street, and that's suited. So we might want to think about the quantitative measures that don't preclude developments of a certain style in a certain area. Just thinking ahead, we might want more 3 or 4 story places. So there's a couple of comments that occur to me at the moment. Thank you.
I'd just like to add one more thing to tag on to what Commissioner Rivlin was saying. That I believe a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, we were talking about very excitedly talking about the possibility of a mass timber hotel. I think it was on Salmar. And there's absolutely no way we could have seen that in advance. The technology wasn't even available, certainly not approved for making tall buildings 5 years ago. I really agree with Commissioner Colville saying that we should err on the side of allowing by default to prevent, foreclosing that kind of possibility.
All good comments. I know I can appreciate how difficult this is, and the word compatible is one of the toughest words in the language. I hope it was kosher. I actually did the survey. I hope that was a kosher. I didn't even think about it in terms of planning commission. And I got to say, Simran, I know in the survey it says something about 15 minutes to complete. And I've been on the planning commission for 3+ years. It was so hard. It was so hard. I spent more than an hour. It might have been 2 hours. But what I like about the idea, and it was forced on us by the state, but I do what I like about being a little more objective with our standards, but flexible. But I like the object. I don't want anybody to have to be beholden to my personal design beliefs, because believe me, that they're not the greatest. But I just like the idea of the homeowner and the property owner knowing what they can do to a good extent before they buy the property, buy the house or whatever. So I kind of like them having, some good guidelines there that takes away some of the subjectivity, compatible with the neighborhood. We could talk about that for weeks and not come to a conclusion sometimes. So that's just a really tough thing to do. So I empathize with the job. I know it's tough to do. I wish more people had done that survey, but I tried to get some of my neighbors to do it. And if you're going to do it right, it's going to take you a while. It's a little work, that survey. It's not a multiple guess test. It's an essay test, really. But that's kind of my 2 cents. Anybody else? Have we given you guys enough feedback to get started here, or keep
I do have one
going?
more thing I wanted to throw in if nobody else has anything. There was a really fascinating article, I think it was in City Observatory. It was called The Illegal City of Somerville. And it talks about a place called Somerville, Massachusetts, where it turns out that, I don't want to misquote this, but I believe something like none or almost none of the buildings would actually pass the current standards. And I think that if we're going to implement new objective standards, we should survey the existing buildings to see if, what proportion of the neighborhood is non-conforming. Because this is a real problem with applying standards that, like, historically, I want to say in New York City, something like 40% of the buildings. New York City allows huge buildings and everything, but like 40% of the buildings are currently non-compliant. So I think that should definitely be part of what we do.
Good point. A real good point. You guys okay now, Stephen, for the next step, or?
Yeah, I would, just on that last point, just in terms of concurrence by the other commissioners, I would emphasize that what we are doing is we're trying to clarify existing standards. So we won't be, again, creating new standards. I mean, there has to be something on the books, a policy in place for us to take that exercise of trying to add clarity, right? So if it's saying do X or do Y, and we're trying to clarify that, and that's clear that it's trying to achieve something, I can see an argument that we don't want to create a number of nonconformities in a community, but insofar as surveying existing standards and how many homes are already non-compliant with existing standards, say there's a height limit, as Commissioner Rivlin had mentioned earlier, let's say 28 feet in Santa Tomas. I'm hoping the expectation is that we're not going to be re-verifying with the whole neighborhood what percentage of homes are compliant with a height standard. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to complete under this task. We just don't have the resources, staff time to dedicate to that level of analysis or review. So I would add a little bit of caution on that particular point, and that's kind of what I kind of want to hear more from before we take that as guidance.
Yeah, well, let me just say the problem with that is that there's a lot of buildings that were built before you had the standards. I mean, the city was incorporated in 1950 something, and you know, there's a lot of buildings that got built, I'm sure, before we have the present standards. So it might be an interesting exercise, but I'm not sure what it would accomplish personally.
Could you outline the next steps, Stephen? I suspect there's hundreds of lines of municipal code, not code, municipal code that need to be edited or modified, or are we going to be reviewing each one, or what's the next meeting going to cover?
I mean, there's two parts of this process, as we kind of touched on lightly, maybe arguably too lightly. We have a short-term fix. We'd intended on doing it a while back. We're working on it and re-engaging that effort now, which is meant to do the quick fixes to text to patch the most critical and pressing issues that we can tackle as staff. Those you could see at any time as we have them available. It's our intention to move them forward as quickly as we can. We have one such item later on the agenda tonight, which is just to help hopefully get the Planning Commission's feet wet and kind of get a familiarity with what this process looks like. The other changes, the long-term fix, our idea would be a lot of those would be kind of more or less packaged together. You might be seeing a number of updates all grouped together at one meeting. And hopefully we're getting the kind of feedback now that we need to be able to successfully implement those types of changes so that you guys aren't too surprised by what we come up with. We are going to be applying our own independent professional judgment, as Simran had previously mentioned. We were going to be doing the absolute best that we can to try to translate these and not introduce new rules or policies where they're not called for. And yeah, I mean, we have received a number of good comments tonight, and we can take a lot of that moving forward.
I have one question to ask Stephen. Okay, so I very much understand that auditing every building in Campbell to see if it is compliant or if it would be compliant under these standards, totally implausible. You don't have the resources to do that. That said, would it be useful to at least look over the last N approvals that did not require a variance in the area, in the city, because presumably the applications are on file and you don't need to run out there and see what the house looks like or anything like that, and make sure that we're not, the worry I have here is that we're going to accidentally make it way, way, way harder than we want to build something here. And I'm just thinking of doing this as some kind of safety check. Is that plausible?
If I may make a suggestion, I think if, to your point, Commissioner, if there are buildings, especially homes that become non-conforming as a result of these new objective standards, there can be provisions put in place that allow for those provisions in the non-conforming chapter that allow for those buildings to be grandfathered in, and the new standards only apply if they come in for additions or changes, and only apply to those portions. So that's something that's actually also included. So for example, for ADUs, that's a part of what the state requires you to do. You're not allowed, cities aren't allowed to require that if the primary structure is non-conforming for any reason, they have to bring that into compliance with the code. So one could consider similar provisions for the application of the objective standards as well for existing structures.
I appreciate that, although that's not exactly what, I'm not so much worried about whether we're going to cause trouble for people who already have homes, as like the concern I have is that we will accidentally be making development a lot more difficult. That even if we don't go after people who have non-conforming structures, that these standards, which are intended to just mirror the existing standards which we would apply subjectively, turn out to make things a lot more difficult unintentionally.
I can say, just add on that that is something that we are cognizant of and we're trying to be mindful of moving forward. One of the updates that we're working on is to the plan development ordinance to include standards for mixed-use development, which we don't presently have. As part of that update process as staff, what we've been working on and looking at is, like you said, like the last 9 developments which we've approved, and trying to say, okay, what were those projects and what were their floor area ratios and what were their height, so that if we're clarifying, or even in that particular case, establishing standards for mixed-use development, that we're not suddenly precluding what we've been building. That's absolutely well taken, and we will be mindful of that as we move forward. And that's something that I can definitely take to heart. That we're at least looking at a couple of the last projects. I don't know if your expectation would be for us to then present the results and proof that we actually did that analysis as part of our reports. That might complicate matters considerably, but know that we are going to be looking at that.
That absolutely addresses what I was worried about. So thank you for doing that. That's what I wanted to hear.
Since we use the height and the lime green color and a few hypotheticals, what I'd be worried or curious to prevent myself related to Commissioner Bookbinder's comments, that let's say there's a 29-foot lime green house, and the new standards call for no lime green and 28 feet, or now adjacent to single family homes, we're preventing that second story. They come in to add an ADU or an addition, and now their whole house has to be lowered by a foot. I know we would say as a body here, that's not what we want to do, but I'd want to make sure that the essence of this process doesn't force that non-conformance to then have to change their entire structure or repaint their entire house, and those are hypotheticals. I'm sure there's some part of the design I'm not thinking of. Rebuild an entire fence because some objective standard changed. I can't predict it. I can't think through it right now. I'm sure we could have endless brainstorm sessions to find that one issue, and hopefully those don't occur, but that's just my feeling. We'd want to prevent damaging existing homeowners' futures.
I can just generally add that our non-conforming section provides latitude to change and alter even non-conforming properties, provided that you aren't intensifying that non-conformity. That's very broadly stated, almost to a fault, but that's the general idea. So say you had that 29-foot tall lime green house, and you were to do an addition on the back of it, and that addition wasn't at 29 feet tall and at a new peak that you're adding, that at a new non-continuation of that existing non-conforming height. That's why I'm saying it gets nuanced. But if you're doing a small addition on the back and that new addition, say 14 feet tall, and it's still a lime green house, that wouldn't necessarily be a non-conforming. Color is kind of a unique thing, but the point's well taken. We can look at that.
That largely addresses my concern. Thank you.
Okay, lots of good comments, folks. So we'll close item 2. Stephen, that's okay?
Yeah, I actually got some really good points right there at the tail end, so I appreciate that.
Good, all right. I think that was all good stuff. And let's take a little break until we do our item 3, guys. So let's take a 5-minute break until 9:30. We'll reconvene.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Michael, I'm back, but I'm just gonna be off video for a few minutes, just so
Oh,
you know.
Okay, Maggie.
Yeah, I'm checking in.
So I think we learned, Commissioner Rivlin, that you really want your house to be lime green.
It probably doesn't go in line with the CCNRs in my community.
Everybody's favorite color.
I'll fight that good fight in another meeting.
I see type of pink being pastel pink being more your color, Commissioner Rivlin.
My daughters would totally agree. Bright pink.
Real men love pink.
Yeah, I have no problem wearing a pink shirt, but yeah, maybe not on my house. Who knows? Yeah, the San Francisco streets, it works there for sure.
Well, back in the 90s, I lived over on the west side, the most western development, which was just west of San Tomas Aquino near Campbell Avenue.
That's where I am now.
Excuse me?
That's where I am now.
And there was one house in this 200 or 300 home development that was bright red. And everybody knew, that, I mean, it really was not, it was out of place, but, it was there. And I don't know what the standards were in those days, but this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So they painted it bright red.
I think we're all back.
Commissioner, Chair Cray, I'm not convinced we finished the item unless I fell asleep. There was a section. It's on page 91 of the PDF where there's a talk about the implementation methods for long term, and I was under the impression we were supposed to discuss that and give recommendations.
I don't know, Stephen.
No, I mean, the last item, the goal of it was just to provide just general guidance, is to receive a report and provide feedback on the community survey. And
I'm talking about the part where it says there's 3 different implementation methods: expand the scope of the general plan, hire a dedicated consultant, or form neighborhood subcommittees.
yeah, so we included it as part of that particular item, a copy of our report to the city council. So that's actually a copy of the city council report. So we provide that for mostly just background information about the laws and how we got to the stage. But that was the council action, which I think it also informed our how we got to today.
Okay, can I ask a question about that? It says that there's like $125,000 of funding, which is apparently the staff feels that's not sufficient. Did you guys come up with a number of what is needed?
Yeah, so for the objective standards update, we ended up targeting SB2 grant funds towards that, which totaled, I believe, $160,000. So that's how much money we ended up earmarking the totality of that grant. It's a planning grant which we applied for, and we get reimbursed for as we expend it. That's what the update is going to cost the city. But we're talking a number of documents, as you'll see, and it's going to be a pretty comprehensive update.
Okay.
Okay, then. So let's move to our third and our final item on the agenda for the Campbell Planning Commission November 24th meeting. Item number 3, public hearing to consider a city-initiated general plan amendment, PLN 2020-151, to the north of Campbell Avenue area plan, NOCA, to incorporate objective standards and procedures in accordance with recent changes to state law. Staff is recommending that this item be deemed categorically exempt under CEQA, and our project planner again is Stephen Rose.
Thank you again, Chair Cray, members of the Planning Commission. So just as covered, the area that we're talking about is the north of Campbell Avenue area. It's kind of depicted here in the red outline on the screen on the right. It's north of downtown, south of Hamilton, really east of Harrison, and to the left of the rail tracks. So just as discussed really during our last item, the City Council has directed staff to prepare objective standards and procedures for all residential projects in response to recent changes in state law. The update is focused on, again, clarifying existing policy language. Is not intended to create or even change the meaning of existing standards or policies. The proposed changes to the NOCA plan and related sections of the general plan represent a short-term fix aimed at resolving the most pressing and critical issues which can be readily addressed by staff. There are a number of additional general plan policies, such as LUT 15.1E all the way through 15.3, which are going to be addressed separately as part of our long-term fix, which is going to be prepared by the city's objective standard consultant, Ramey and Associates. So while the NOCA plan, we picked the NOCA plan, truth be told, given its due to its brevity, and with the intention of helping familiarize the Planning Commission with this process. So it is in its way meant to help get our feet wet as we kind of tackle kind of these larger documents. It's also, although we're focused on the NOCA plan right now, I would also encourage the Planning Commission to go ahead and provide feedback on the report and the presentation of these materials so that we can successfully navigate this process. As we're going to be tackling bigger documents. This one happened to be a single page. You saw the level of analysis that went into that. And we're going to be tackling we're going to be talking 30-page, 40-page documents up and coming. So just keep that in mind. And just the last point I wanted to make was that because this action does reflect an amendment to the general plan, the action by the Planning Commission tonight just serves as a recommendation to the City Council. So no formal decision is going to be, well, a recommendation will be made. The action won't be final, and we will get a second somewhat bite at this apple when we do return with the long-term fix. So what we don't tackle today, we will be tackling as part of that long-term fix. So with that said, and in preparing the changes that you see tonight, staff had conducted an assessment of the NOCA plan, as well as related sections of the general plan to ensure that the proposed changes could be found consistent with the general plan, which in fact is actually one of the required findings you'll see noted in the draft resolution. So as an outcome of that review, staff had actually identified a discrepancy within the general plan itself in regard to the maximum number of allowable units, or the units per gross acre, as well as the floor area ratio for non-residential uses. And that's actually here displayed here on screen. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse. So the first two strategies, LUT 15.1A and 15.1B, they pretty much express that non-residential uses are allowed up to 1.0 floor area ratio, and that residential development is to be allowed up to 20. The very next section, just kind of going down in a row, 15.1C, the very next one that occurs, kind of contradicts itself. It's saying 2.0 floor area ratio, which contradicts the 1.0, and the 27 units per gross acre instead of the 20. In the report, we kind of documented where and why we believe that might have occurred, and it looks like it was a copy-paste error from kind of pulling from a previous section related to the prune yard section. So we were looking at fixing that as part of this update in addition to the NOCA plan itself. That way we can kind of ensure internal consistency between the two documents. So with that said, I mean, now that we're looking at the strategy LUT 15.1C, this is in the general plan land use element itself. The section titles says it's allowable density when it doesn't, it's not just density, it's density and floor area ratio. So we felt as if that was unclear. You have these two misrepresented data points, a 2.0 floor area ratio and the 27 units per gross acre, which doesn't match the other strategies or area plan language. And the table is kind of incomplete. It kind of stops at 2.99. It doesn't really go beyond that to say what happens on larger lots. So the revised general plan changes. So I know this is kind of a lot to go through just because of the nature of track changes. So I'm trying to provide these circles and this additional guidance to explain what's changing and how that's happening. But again, the new language says it's for this strategy is related to floor area ratio and density. So we more accurately capture the intention of the section. And it's to allow a floor area ratio of 1.0. So we're going from what it currently reads as 2, which is inaccurate, down to 1. And we're changing it from 27 down to 20, again, to match the other policies and strategies. And then we also went and updated the table, the corresponding table, to include the full range of lot sizes, including those which are greater than 3 units per gross acre, and to update the table as well to reflect the same. So in regard to the NOCA plan, so I kind of broke this down into 3 pages, and ironically, the first page almost has no edits at all, just because it's such a short document. And the edit which we're proposing on the cover sheet of the NOCA plan is just really to add revision dates. And the intention of that is just for, I guess you could say, revision history and tracking, so that again, we know that we're looking at the right document when we're looking at it. So it's more of an administrative clerical edit, I guess you could say. We have that in other area plans as well. Now, I want to kind of break this down into 3 parts. We have different header types. So we have this land use section at the beginning of the document. So in this section, what we've done is we've added, the language currently says mixed residential, office, and commercial retail uses are encouraged throughout the area west of the railroad tracks, without really defining what those uses are. So we've actually added clarity here by actually pointing the reader, again, trying to provide some degree of assurance that these are the uses that people should be looking to when they're proposing or looking at renting space or otherwise in the area. And we're pointing to those uses as governed by the R2 in regard to the residential. Why the R2? The NOCA plan allows up to 20 units per gross acre on the high end. The R2 happens to be the corresponding zoning district, which matches that same density range, 20 units per gross acre. That's why we picked R2. PO, again, the language says it allows for mixed residential office. Office is very comparable to a professional office zoning district. So we felt as if that was a good match. And then commercial uses as governed by the C1 zoning district, which I'm going to actually cover in a little bit more detail. That one took a little bit more discretion. I have a whole slide just dedicated to that one minor decision. So really adding clarity to the uses. Now, in addition to that, there's other strategies and policy languages which talks about the areas which are fronting onto Harrison. So it does not want the area, if you read the other strategies in the general plan, the land use element, it does not want the same character to be carried throughout. There's a lot of consideration paid to the frontage of Harrison, not really defining what frontage means, but it really wants that area along Harrison to be limited to a lower density range. I think capping out at 13 units per gross acre. And so again, we've added clarity to say that should point to either the RD or the RM uses, which again correspond to that same density range in our zoning ordinance, which is why those particular uses were selected. Now, coming up with this within the first 66 feet clause to actually define what fronting Harrison means. Again, that required a little bit more discretion. I've got a whole slide, which I'll jump to here in a second, explaining that. Again, we have this whole discussion on floor area ratio and density. And again, we've gone through the code to try to just clean this language up, to just make it, it's really hard to follow with the track changes here. I apologize for that. But it's saying that, the minimum and maximum floor area ratio and density for projects throughout the area shall be in accordance with this table. So we just really lay out a clean table. Again, it's meant to match up with the general plan table, which we just established. And again, recognizing we have a couple limited exceptions, we draw attention to those at the bottom, saying that, there's an exception that floor area ratio or floor area of residential uses and or residential components of mixed use projects shall not be counted. So that was an intentional element of the NOCA plan, that they wanted to kind of encourage residential development by carving out an exception so you don't get penalized for having a residential project in the area. And then separately, there's another exception, which again at the bottom of the table says properties fronting Harrison Avenue are permitted up to the maximum density of 13 units per gross acre. So that's again another little exception to the otherwise the rule of the table. Now there are a couple other interesting things in the NOCA plan, and those pertain to the joint use of parking. Staff ended up recommending the striking of that particular provision because it's already covered by a different section of the municipal code, CMC 2128055, which is our parking section. It pretty much governs how joint use of parking in a mixed use setting works. It has discussion about guest parking being able to be shared and the like. Again, there's 2 other sections which we're also recommending for removal. which is a discussion on traffic. Really, the policy language here is very vague, I would say at best. It's saying development proposal shall assess the impact of the proposed traffic and will be responsible for mitigating traffic impacts. It's not really necessary for an area plan to have that. We already analyzed that under CEQA, as well as the VTA traffic impact guidelines. So as such, it's not having a direct reference in the plan wasn't necessary, so we're recommending removal. And then finally, this we have this density bonus language. This is kind of an older provision, which is we now have a density bonus ordinance. It's under CMC 2120. So this language is not even consistent with that anymore. It allows up to 35% maximum density bonus. That's changing all the time. So it's not really appropriate to have a direct reference to the density bonus within, unless we were to reference this section of code, there's no point in really having it in here. It applies regardless. And developers are savvy enough to know about that. So we don't want to provide limits and caps, recognizing the state might change that next year, right? So we're recommending just striking the whole section. It still applies, but just the removal of it, you can still do a density bonus project. We're just removing its reference from the NOCA plan itself. So I promised that I had 2 slides, really kind of talking about these discretionary elements of it, like the decision to pick C1 as the comparable uses in the area. So the NOCA plan, within the general plan, we have this policy language under LUT 34. And it goes on to say that in the NOCA area, it says, due to the proximity to single family residential, retail and commercial uses in the area should be of low impact in nature. For example, operate during the daytime hours, not generate noise, vibration, or a large amount of traffic. And so we're thinking about that, and which of we have 3 commercial designations. We've got the C1, the neighborhood commercial. We've got the C2, the general commercial. We've got the C3, which is the central business district, which is really the downtown. And then we look at the purpose of the C1 neighborhood zone district. And it's saying that it's supposed to be compatible with neighboring residential uses, and it's intended for commercial uses at major intersections within residential areas. And that is within, as opposed to like the C2, which you'll find occurs on major transportation corridors like Hamilton here. You've got Bascom, Winchester, and Kirtner. So these are areas which are more heavy traffic roads, and it's kind of an inconsistent use to apply the C2 here. And again, like the C3 is a very limited section. It's meant to mostly just apply to this little limited downtown core, and even bother labeling it because it's so tiny. So for those reasons, again, reading the purpose of this discussion of what the NOCA plan is, what commercial uses in that area are meant to be, and comparing it to C1, we felt out to be the most comparable. Second point, requiring a little bit more clarity and discretion in our application, and I guess you could say our turning that subjective standard into an objective one, was this this idea that residential development facing Harrison Avenue, these are the 3 policies which are really governing that. It says that ensure that developments that front Harrison are residential and compatible with existing residential development on Harrison. So it really was looking at building north and south, looking at the single family traditional kind of look and feel. And then it goes on to say this other strategy says ensure single family residential densities up to 13 units per gross acre. And again, when you're looking at a deeper parcel, you need to have a limit, a line, in order for us as a staff, as a practitioner, to actually calculate and verify compliance with the standard. So we need a depth to be applied in order for us to confirm compliance, that the project will be built at, or that at least that component of it satisfies the density limit of 13 units per gross acre. And the last one is, this is really talking about what happens beyond. It's saying allow the rear portions of properties fronting Harrison Avenue to be developed with residential, office, commercial, mixed use, otherwise not permitted in NOCA. So the idea is, it's really trying to clarify, we're really talking about just that areas along the front. We want to limit to 13, but beyond that, we should allow for commercial and mixed use types of developments, which means we really need to draw a line in the sand somewhere to define exactly what that limit line is for what constitutes fronting. So for that, what we did was, you see over here on the right, we have this exhibit, kind of looking at Ainsley Square, which is a recently I say recently in I got feedback on that. I mean, it was a long time ago now, but it's a development of single family detached homes, which could be found compatible with all of these policies. And in that same area, you have this type of density. You have about 6 units over kind of the similar length of space, 192 feet, which is kind of achieves this 13 units per gross acre density. So what this kind of graphic up here is showing is if we were to measure 66 feet deep, you're kind of seeing that kind of same limit line being drawn, and that same density could be applied throughout the parcel at the northeast corner of Salmar and Harrison if we were to kind of apply that same standard, if and when that site were to say ever redevelop. That would be kind of maintaining that same kind of plan line, maintaining that prevalent development pattern in the neighborhood. It would also be feasible once you measure it, taking into the account the gross lot size, which is measured center on a street, that would actually be feasible and developable. So to that prior point, I think on our last item, we had a comment that, are we looking at other developments when we're thinking about standards? Absolutely. And not only that, we're also trying, when we're creating a standard and we're trying to clarify a standard, we're trying to be very cognizant of that and trying to make sure that we're not doing something that is either too restrictive and take away like a right or development potential of a property, which was benefited to another one even so recently as the Ainsley Square project had it to the south. So that's an example of that. So that said, I did want to highlight kind of something new. This kind of came to my attention after the publication of the item. And it's that within our table, so in attachment 1, exhibit B, the first row of the table talking about floor area ratio and densities actually has a typographical, what appears to be a typographical error in it, where it says 8 to 13 in the first row in the farthest right column. It should read, as attachment 2 does, up to 8. And this just happens to be an oddity with Microsoft Word and the way that it was handling the redlining and track changes of comments between 2 merged and compared documents. So when the changes were accepted, it reads correctly, but in the version, if you look at it in the attachment, it reads incorrectly. So as part of tonight's action, if we're supportive of all the other changes that we've been proposing, this would be something that we need to mention as part of the motion, that we want to just clarify that farthest right cell here is meant to read up to 8 and not 8 to 13 as it would currently appear. And to that point, I do have a revised motion that additional new language is added in blue to kind of add that additional clarity. And with that said, the staff's recommendation is for the Planning Commission to take the following action, and that is to adopt a resolution recommending the City Council approve a city-initiated general plan amendment to the north of Campbell Avenue plan and related sections, and with the additional amendment that you see here in blue. And that concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Good report, very full. Any questions for Stephen?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Am I on? Yeah, I'm on. I'm looking at the map of the whole area, the Noka area, and it ends. When it goes up Salmar, it only covers the west side up to, I guess, whatever is Home Depot. And all that's all those are storage places. It doesn't cover the right side. Do you have any idea why this area doesn't cover the right side of Salmar? That's kind of between the turn and Fry's.
Well, I mean that parcel. Fry's is kind of a long parcel and kind of goes all the way, I believe, down to the edge there. And I mean, as far as this update goes, we're not really re-looking at the boundary lines of the NOCA plan. Again, this is kind of just going based on.
Well, but there's some right there at the turn. Right there at the turn, it's not Fry's parcel. There's some and there's some commercial stuff there that is kind of, old commercial stuff that goes into the back. And then there's a building that's a construction company. So yeah, I guess, that's not something we can talk about today. But what I wanted to talk about also is the Harrison side. You're talking about single family homes that only for basically at the where Selmar hits Harrison to north to where the homes start. And you're saying that you would only want single family homes allowed there. Is that what you're saying?
It doesn't necessarily, the additional language that we have is limiting the density range to that up to 13. It doesn't actually prescribe single family. You could have duets, you could have attached townhome units, so long as you're staying under that density range.
Okay.
There's different ways of expressing that. Again, we do benchmark to the allowable uses of the RM and the RD, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not misquoting that. Those do prescribe certain uses. You can't do certain types of development, but yeah, that's a general idea.
All right, because I think across the street they actually have a couple of whatever duplexes or something that's going on over there. So it's not like all those homes that face that are all single family homes. So I was worried that maybe we were being a little bit too inflexible there. Of course, all that area is now being used. There's not any open area there. That area has the school district corporation yard, and I guess all that could change, right?
Well, the school corporation yard area, that's again outside the area plan, but yeah, the area which we're talking about, the frontage at the northeast intersection of Salmar and Harrison, that first 66 feet that we're talking about, that could be used as duplexes. You could develop it that way, the way that this has been written up.
Okay.
I have a question real quick regarding policy LUT 15.2. The verbiage here, residential facing Harrison Avenue, ensure the developments that front Harrison Avenue are residential and, quote, in a format compatible with existing residential development on Harrison Avenue and surrounding the Civic Center. Now, you then go down into strategies, LUT 15.2A and B for land use and density. But we see here the verbiage of just ambiguity, format compatible with existing residential development. Is there something I'm missing regarding the terminology being used? Were we not trying to move away from that?
I would broadly characterize this update as we're trying to add clarity where it's necessary and needed to a large extent. I mean, there's policy language in the general plan. That's what you're getting at here, is getting at design principles. So ensure that it's compatible with residential development. We are targeting those design components towards the long-term fix. So we will be revisiting the NOCA plan with Simran and team to evaluate those kind of some of those subjective standards and see if there's anything else we might need to do to kind of accomplish it. And I'm seeing the city attorney jumping in, so I'll defer.
And I would also point out that you still can use subjective criteria to develop conditions to condition the design of a particular project.
Yeah,
we're not prohibited from having subjective standards. You just cannot use them to deny a project.
Correct. And I'll also add that the general plan is, by its very nature, generally more broad. It generally has more of this guidance language. And then when the rubber hits the road is actually in the area plan or in the zoning ordinance. So in the area plan is where we'd add that additional descriptive text to really accomplish what we're aiming at achieving here. So again, all of the language in the NOCA plan is trying to be very objective, but we're being a little bit more standoffish or hands-off on all of the strategies that you're seeing in the general plan.
Got it. But it sounds like we will most likely be revisiting that type of verbiage at a later time. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the idea is, as part of the long-term fix, we'll be revisiting. I had identified a couple of the later policies as really being design emphasized. But if we feel as if the commission feels that there's some additional points that you're seeing, like that one, where you feel as if some additional discretion, not just saying, not just allowing that residential development limited to 13 units per gross acre, if that doesn't go far enough, and we feel as if additional guidance in the NOCA plan needs to be added to provide that level of, I don't know, clarity of what that means, that's guidance that could be well taken, and we could think about that as part of the long-term update.
Thank you, Stephen.
Question. On pages 138 and 141 of the packet, there's under where it says floor area ratio and density, it says the minimum and maximum floor area ratio. But as far as I can see, it only specifies maximum floor area for FARs. Is there a minimum FAR defined anywhere that I'm missing here?
So give me a second to catch up. I just want to make sure that in the clean line version of the plan that we still have that minimum maximum.
That's 141 in the packet. It says the minimum and maximum floor area ratio and density for projects through the north of Campbell Avenue area shall be as follows, and it just lists a maximum allowable FAR.
Even it's minimum parcel size. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the language is written that way to be able to capture the second point that's being made, that it does happen to be a minimum and a maximum density. So we've been trying to hold that we don't want you to develop under a minimum density range. So you're correct. I mean, you could split the sentence into almost two parts if you wanted to be a little bit more verbose about it and say the minimum floor area ratio and minimum and maximum density if you want to be more verbose, but I think that the same intent is carried the way it's written.
If that reads to everybody else as clear, then that's what you intended, then I have no, as long as that's clear, I have no complaints about that. The other thing that I wanted to double check is we are changing the actual, as I understand it, the current plan says one thing in one place and a different thing in another place. Is there anywhere in the NOCA region where there is a lot larger than 3 acres, a development larger than 1 FAR, or something with more than 20 dwelling units per acre? Like, has anything already been developed to these standards that were not intended to be put in place in the first place?
I mean, we're only talking about a limited number of parcels. We have the Ainsley Square, which was obviously consolidated to exceed 3 acres at the time, I believe. So that would be an example of one of those lots that had actually exercised that maximum limit. Then they also didn't build as a mixed-use project. It built as just a combination of attached and detached single-family homes. I'm not familiar with it violating the floor area ratio cap. If that's what you're getting at. I'm not familiar with any of these.
Sorry, is Stephen cutting out for anybody
We're
else?
losing some of your audio, Stephen.
If I can weigh in with another way to phrase what I think Commissioner Bookbinder is asking, and I had the same question, is anything in the NOCA exceeding 1.0 FAR at this time? Prior to, making this code or this change to a strategy LUT 15.1C, would there have been, would the public storage system or would the Ainsley Square development have exceeded 1.0?
Just looking at the aerial map, the only 2 properties which could possibly, I'm guessing, exceed that would be the Salmore Terrace. I mean, in that case, we have stacked stories. I mean, the storage buildings won't, because I believe they're just 1-story buildings out there, nor would Ainsley Square. But again, these are both larger lots, which could exercise the larger. Again, I could check that, but I don't have that information readily available right now.
I guess the other part of that question is why I understood the logic that it may have been inadvertently copied from Pruneyard's language, but is there guidance from staff on why and I'm sure there is, but I'd like to hear from you on why we'd want to cap at 1.0.
So, and this is going to be one of the heartbreaking parts of this process. I'll be forthright with right now. There may very well be policies which the commission disagrees with as we kind of advance and clarify existing standards. And that if it's true to the original intent, that should be the objective of what we're trying to achieve. So if we necessarily disagree that, say, the maximum units per gross acre should be 20, it should be higher because of its proximity light rail, what have you. Or if we think that the floor area ratio should be higher for whatever reason, unless we have that clarity in the plan documents, we shouldn't be trying to introduce or change it for those reasons that we don't necessarily agree with it. So, I mean, as far as speaking to the intent of it, if we have a reason for if we're just providing clarity, hopefully that's clear, to what it currently reads or what it's currently trying to do. And we've identified as this, and on this particular point, the floor area ratio, it's inconsistent with the preceding sections as well as the NOCA plan itself. It appears like that was clearly what it was trying to do. And we're not really trying to second guess the reasoning behind that right now. Very well, it may require, revisiting at some future date and time when the NOCA plan does have a comprehensive update, which is going to be a totally different work plan item than this one. Here, we're just trying to clarify what we've got on the books. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. Well, last part of this then, have any landowners come towards you with a development that would exceed 1.0 in, based on their properties in the NOCA?
Not that I'm familiar with now.
Okay. Thanks for answering.
That addresses my questions. I absolutely understand that we're not looking to change any kind of policy. My only concern would be that the de facto policy has become something else in the intervening time. And as long as it hasn't, I have no issue with approving this. This looks like very good work. I especially appreciate removing a lot of redundant language from the area plan to make it a lot easier to read.
Stephen, I'll just ask you and I think you just answered it, but just to be sure. So if, it's a good report and I can see that the 20 was the intent versus the 27, but if in the general plan update or in some process we wanted to go to 27 units per acre, we could still do that. That's just a different process than what we're doing right now.
Correct. So as you go ahead and take note of all the changes as we go through these area plans of things that you'd like to see. But as part of this update, we are trying to stay laser focused. We're calling it a surgical update to, again, just clarify what we have on the books and not try to change that. Because you can imagine as we're going through, we're saying seven different area plans and all these sections of municipal code, it would be a tremendous effort to not only clarify them, but to also change them and then clarify them at the same time.
Sure, no, I can understand that. And the reason you're doing the NOCA area first is because you found this discrepancy and it was a relatively quick one to do. Relatively quick. Doesn't look that quick, but why are you doing NOCA first? Is it just because of that discrepancy you found?
Truth be told, we thought it would be, I thought it was actually going to be one of the easier ones because it's just a single page.
All right.
But I found myself to be mistaken quite readily as I started to tackle it.
Thank you. Any other questions? We do have, I think there's people perhaps that want to speak on this item. So let's open up the public hearing. And if anybody wants to speak on the item, now's your chance.
Chair Craig, I see one question from Kelly Snyder.
Oh, Kelly, yeah, Kelly, it's open.
Hi, thank
Okay.
you. Hi there, this is Kelly Snyder. I think my comment, I was wanting to comment on this specific item, and I think Commissioners Rivlin and Bookbinder kind of addressed this with Mr. Rose a moment ago, but I'll go ahead and give it anyway. I've been working very closely with the owners of the property formerly known as Fry's, recently closed down for business at 600 East Hamilton, which is where the commissioner was asking about the right side of Salmar. I understand it's not a part of the NOCA plan, I was interested in this item, the NOCA plan revisions or corrections, because I was very concerned, and the ownership of the Fry's property is concerned because we saw the FAR going down, we saw the total yields and the density, allowable densities going down, which really just seemed like the wrong direction. Because the RENA allocation for the city of Campbell is currently proposed to be 3,960 new homes in Campbell in the next 10 years. That's a lot. It's over a 300% increase from your last RENA allocation. And this whole area, both the NOCA plan and the area which you're calling the specific plan overlay, the new Hamilton Avenue specific plan overlay, is part of the priority development area for the region from Plan Bay Area and ABAG. And obviously, with the demise of bricks and mortar retail, not only the Fry's retailing shop, but everything impacted by COVID and everything impacted by the to-go culture and online deliveries, it just seems like increasing the residential densities and being more flexible with relation to mixed uses and the amount of space for commercial, office, or retail uses in conjunction with residential should be balanced a little bit better. So I understand now, based on your responses, that this is more of a correction of I guess, what were typos. And so it's not the time to really look at the reason for the policy, but just trying to sort of surgically correct it. So I guess I'll conclude by just saying we look forward to watching this whole area evolve, particularly as this NOCA plan is amended and as the new general plan hopefully will be adopted in the next 3 or 4 months or something, with the ultimate intention of really trying to bring that mixed use, multi-use, pedestrian oriented feel to the north part of Salmar, Hamilton Avenue frontage, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else who wants to speak on this item? Doesn't look like it. So let's close the public hearing and come back to commission. So open for discussion.
I guess I'd like to say that though we're definitely not talking about this today, I'm very much looking forward to our upcoming housing element update, which will certainly be challenging in that the state has much more stringent requirements to ensure that housing actually gets built and that sites are developable and so on. I've been reading up on the state's guidance on this, and there's quite a lot to do. So we may not be doing that right now, but we are certainly thinking about it.
Sure. I think comment on the report, I think it's obviously a very thorough and very diligent report by staff. In some respects, I think it's slightly fatuous for me to comment on it because they've done a lot of work and thought on it. I do take to heart what Ms. Snyder was talking about as a longer term view and the use of mixed housing and pedestrian walkways and all that type of stuff. But that is type out of the remit of what we're trying to do here and fix a short term problem and address a longer term opportunity. So I don't really have any issues, and I'd be supportive of this recommendation.
Yeah, I'll just say as well as the commissioner has said, I know our RENA numbers are really high, and we've got to come to grips with that, and that is a big issue. But in terms of this plan, I think it was a great staff report. Stephen spelled it out, or the staff spelled it out really nicely, and I agree with Commissioner Ching. I have no problem with it.
I concur. This is excellent work from staff, and I think that this is the sort of thing that we're going to find ourselves doing a lot of over the next year or so. That there's a lot of existing language that's going to be tightened up, made more specific. We're going to find mistakes in our code, and this is a necessary nitpicky kind of process. I'd like to thank Stephen for working on this, and I support this.
we can try a motion perhaps, or?
Yeah, I have a closing thought. I think my concerns were addressed. I just was wanting to, I think we've seen it, and staff did put enough detail for us to understand the intent and that there was indeed a typo or a transpose from another area plan. I guess in closing, maybe Stephen can answer a question. When will we see that? It's in one of the exhibits from the 1990s. When will we see that railway extension up to Almar? I liked that map, and I want to know when that goes under construction. I guess it would be a tunnel under some of those homes there. Anyway,
I'm not sure if I'm following the. There's an
it's more for levity. There's a map in the Exhibit B of the 1990s. Actually, it's called Exhibit C, and it shows a proposed amendment to the circulation element, which connects railway to Salmar. But anyway, I definitely.
Yes, yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah, it's when the council had originally adopted the NOCA plan. They included that exhibit.
I support the.
A little bit of history.
Yeah, the efforts you prepared this research with. Thanks.
And if I may, Commissioner, if I'm seeing enough, I can pull back up the slide that had the amended motion, just in case anyone wanted to refer to it.
Anybody want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council approve a city-initiated general plan amendment PLN 2020-151 to the north of Campbell Avenue area (NOCA plan) and related sections of the general plan to incorporate objective standards and procedures in accordance with recent changes to state law, with a revision to the floor area ratio table included as Exhibit B to clarify lots under an acre are limited to 8 dwelling units, an acre as captured in the clean line version.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Bookbinder seconded it. Kareem?
Ready.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioners Bookbinder,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Colville,
Aye.
Rivlin,
Aye.
Disser, Commissioner,
You're muted.
Commissioner Zisser, your mic is off right now. You're muted.
I'm sorry. Aye. Aye.
Thank you, sir. Vice Chair Ostrowski
Aye.
and Chair Cray.
Aye. So that passes unanimously, and I guess that goes to City Council at a meeting date uncertain at this point. So item 3 is done, and then we'll have the Community Development Director's report. Mr. Kamoyan, any?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the items in the director's report. I don't really see anything worth mentioning, but of course, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Any questions?
Earlier in the year, I recognize that these things happen in their own time, but I remember you saying that the general plan update, we'd probably be seeing it sometime around November or December, and it looks like it won't be coming before us at least by the first meeting in December. Have there been delays about when we'll be expected to see that?
Yeah, so the council has received a series of reports, and we met with them. We, being the city manager and myself, met individually with council members following that meeting to go through a list of all of their questions and comments as it relates to the draft general plan. Right now, I'm taking individual comments, putting them into a chart, trying to identify some themes. The next step is to then meet with the city council as a group and go through the comments that can either easily be changed or those that require further policy discussion. We're anticipating that meeting to occur in January, and then the council at that point will establish next steps. So yes, Commissioner Bookbinder, the schedule is definitely off and has moved back.
Okay, and on that topic, as I understand it, the upcoming housing element will be done separately from the general plan?
That is correct. We actually have until January 2023 to complete the housing element.
So we will not be starting on that for some time?
Probably about a year from now. Yeah.
Okay.
Takes about a year to update your housing element.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Anybody else? If not, then we'll close this meeting of the Campbell Planning Commission is adjourned till our next meeting of December 8th. And everybody stay safe. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Bye.